Hey everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of ExpertlyDyed Art by Science, and this is the daily vlog, episode number 61, and today we are talking about ToeUp Socks. Today I wanted to talk about these socks because as part of my crafting New Year's resolution, I wanted to improve certain knitting skills, and that included learning the ToeUp sock construction method. Now, if you're like me and you are a very tight knitter, which I know there must be some of you out there watching right now, when you do a cuff down construction, there is some difficulty in getting the tension just right. The last pair of socks that I made for myself were too tight. So I did something kind of strange because I did not want to just do a whole new sock, and I didn't I don't think I really had enough yarn to make a third sock anyway, and I didn't really have the capacity to take it all out and then start over again. I just wanted to be done. So what I did was, for the sock, the first sock was fine, second sock was not fine. So what I did was I kind of cut into the sock, and then I picked up the live stitches, and then I knitted up so that I still mimicked, obviously, the knitted cuff for this sock. It turned out to be just fine in the end, but I felt like it was kind of ridiculous because I should have just stopped and gone back and fixed it right when I noticed, but I was being really stubborn and continued on, and I thought, oh, it'll be fine, and I go to put it on and it was just too uncomfortable. So I thought, well, one of the reasons why I wanted to do more with knitting and increasing my skill base was because I want to apply it with my spinning. And so right now what I'm doing is just knitting with commercially spun yarn. What I would like to start doing is taking a lot of these knitting principles and my hand spun and combining them together. So I have done a couple of pairs of hand spun, hand knit socks, but they've always been from the cuff down. So this was sort of a really easy way for me to get a consistent gauge with my knitting and be able to make multiple pairs. So that's what I've got here. I have one sock which is done, and I decided to do a ribbed version. So the bottom of it is just a plain stockinette, which you can see there, just a plain stockinette. But on the top of the sock, I wanted to do just a simple 2x2 rib. And then I've finished the heel, and from the heel up to the top is just all the way around a 2x2 rib. And I'm almost done with sock number 2. But these were sort of a really good opportunity for me to get a sense of how this is done. And I did Judy's cast on method, which for those of you out there who are familiar with ToeUp Socks probably know what I'm talking about. Essentially, you start with your needles, you wrap the yarn a specific way around them, and then you basically start knitting in the round from this point. So it's already joined, and then you just knit the toe. And so what you get is kind of like a squared off toe, where this is sort of like the cast on part, and then you build up the increases on the sides until you get to the right width for the toes. And then once you've washed them and blocked them, they kind of take on a slightly more rounded look, like you can see here. And actually to a certain extent here, it looks a little bit more round. Not perfect, but this was just one way to do it. I know there are other ways to do this as well. And the second challenge, which I didn't really think about when I first started this project, was how to do the heel. So the way that I used to do socks was from the cuff down, you would separate the heel flap and you'd keep the instep stitches, so the ones that go over the top of the foot, right, separate. You do the heel flap, right, and then you do the gusset so that it kind of formed around the heel, and then you'd rejoin to do the rest of the foot, and then you'd get to where you needed to start doing the tapers for the top of the toes, and then you would do the Kitchener bind off, which if you can never remember it, I can't either. So when I was doing this, there are actually lots of different ways to do a toe up heel insert. This one was just German short rows, and so basically what I would do is when I got to about 2 inches from where I wanted to put the heel in, I separated the top stitches, the instep stitches, from the heel part, and then you basically do a bunch of wrap and turns, and you decrease the number of stitches between each wrap and turn until you get kind of like a trapezoidal shape, and that is how you get this heel shape here. So it looks a bit curved here because it's been blocked, but it looks very much like how the toe is trapezoidal, where it's kind of flat here on the top. So again, that was kind of new to me because I had never done that before. And it turns out actually it's really quite easy to do. One thing I will say that I didn't like as much about this type of heel is how much, how many holes it creates. Like the gapping in this method was a lot more extreme for me than doing the top-down construction, where you slip a stitch and then you gather those up and then knit them for the rest of the foot. So I might need to try a different method that I am happier with. And on Pinterest, there was actually someone who made a helpful tutorial in photos on how to just do this type of heel, or sorry, toe up heel construction. So I will probably look into that. Now, another reason why I wanted to do this toe up construction, like I alluded to earlier, was when you get to the end, you have to find a way to bind off. And there are lots of ways to bind off. I used to be a huge fan of doing the knitted bind off, but I found that when I'm trying to mimic my foot going in here, so this would be like the part around my leg. So I would always find that this part here would just stick in to my skin, and then this part down here would be really, really loose, except for the bind off. And no matter what I did, I could not get a nice, loose, but still form-fitting finish to my socks. So instead, what I've done here, and what I also did for my hand-knit, hand-dyed, hand-spun sweater, was the sewn bind off. And you might be able to see in this sort of completed yet not washed or blocked sock, there's a little bit of flaring at the top. But in the finished version, so this one's been washed and blocked, you don't really notice that flaring so much. I mean, there is a tiny bit, but honestly, what I get from doing a sewn bind off, how stretchy that is wonderful. Now, as a side note, these are a belated Christmas present for my mom. Being a creator and a producer of goods, it's sometimes really difficult to get all of your holiday stuff, especially if they're hand knits, in time for Christmas. So I just skipped it. And also there's always a ton of backlog with, you know, holiday presents being shipped overseas. So I decided I'll just wait until January. But then by the time I was ready to ship these, there was the cyber attack. So Royal Mail has not really been able to ship anything internationally for a long time. So I've just been holding on to these, and now that I'll be able to ship these, I can do this video. even though she kind of already knows what she's getting. But long story short, it was really important for me to find an elastic bind off for the top that had lots and lots of give. It's because my mom is diabetic. And the last thing that I want to do is cut off circulation to her feet. So I don't want to give her something that's pretty to look at, but not practical for her to wear. And I also custom made them so that when they sit on her leg, they're a little bit lower. So I didn't have to worry about how like a tall sock, so one that's got a much longer cuff on it. Because the way the calves are shaped, they grow in girth to about 2/3 to 3/4 to the knee. And so I didn't want to have to do any increases for that either. So this was sort of like a happy middle ground, and with the toe-up construction it allowed me to do the sewn bind off, which is by far the easiest way of producing enough flexibility and stretch in a finished edge like this with minimal flaring and without the characteristic almost yarn over looking loops that yarn over looking spaces that you get with Jenny's stretchy bind off. So yeah, overall I'm very happy with having learned this method of making socks because it solves a lot of problems that I've personally encountered, and it also is something that I can work on in the future in terms of how I want to have different heels. So for these socks, I've just done a hand-dyed yarn, which, you know, the colors sort of form most of the visual aesthetic of the sock. But one of the things I would like to do is alternatives to the heel. So I know that, I forget her first name, but her last name is Zimmerman, and I know someone's going to remember and post in the comments below. Thank you. There's what's called like an afterthought heel. So you start knitting a tube and you complete it, and then you find a spot where you want to put the heel. So maybe you are making this for somebody and you don't know exactly how long their foot is, and you're not really confident that they can give you the accurate measurements you need. So to get the surest spot for the heel, you can just have them try on the sock, and then once you've got a spot for where their heel actually is, you can just cut and insert the actual heel part. So you basically would have a tube, right? So you'd have a tube like this, and then you would just put in the heel where it needed to be. And what's really great about that is you could do contrasts very easily. So with this particular method, I'm sure I probably could have just, at the point of when I was going to start doing the German short rows for shaping the heel, I could have just switched to a contrast yarn. But I think there are other ways of doing socks besides the way that I've traditionally done and the way that I did in this case. So it's not necessarily about, oh, this is the way that works, I'm just going to do it like this forever and ever and ever. This is about developing more skills, and so taking me outside of my comfort zone. So now that this is technically the 4th sock that I have knitted this way, I should probably try something different. Or maybe I will try a completely different project. We'll find out. Well, that was sort of my short and sweet catch up with my crafting New Year's resolutions, trying to hold myself accountable and make sure that I am actually trying to achieve my goals this year, but also to give you a little heads up about different construction methods, because when I first started knitting socks, I had no idea there was any other way to do it except for the cuff down, and a lot of patterns are written that way. So now that I'm more familiar with the ToeUp method, I'm going to look for other ways of making heels, making the toe itself, doing different cast-ons, and even how patterns can be reversed. So if you do like a cuff down versus a toe up, the pattern doesn't necessarily translate in quite the same way if you just switch it around. So I'm sure there are tutorials out there for people who are like me, wanting to take a pattern that was done top down and I want to do sort of bottom up, just so that the pattern works out right. Something that I'm not very confident in doing, and I kind of have a sense of how to do it, but it's always helpful to see what else, you know, people have come up with for figuring out this exact problem. So I will spend some time probably looking at that and maybe fantasizing about it a little bit before I actually do it. But anyway, I appreciate you watching this video. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Give this video a like. There's other links to my socials in the description below, as well as a link to my Patreon account. So if you like this content and want to perpetuate it for the future, please consider joining, and you get some first dibs on all videos, ad-free. You get behind the scenes content, and you get to weigh in on certain decisions about how ExpertlyDyed sort of runs in general. So if you want to sort of affect change through the educational system that way, that'd be really awesome. And it helps me out as a creator. I also have my ExpertlyDyed shops on Etsy and also on ExpertlyDyed.com, so check those out as well. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Why won't you let me do my videos? I thought you wanted me.